The dust-laden wind carried the scent of desperation as Willow Montgomery stood on the wooden auction platform, her hands shackled and her swollen belly visible beneath the threadbare cotton dress. At nearly 6 months with child, she trembled not for herself, but for the innocent life growing within her, a life that would be born into bondage unless fate intervened on this sweltering July afternoon in Yankton, Dakota Territory, 1876. Garrett Ingram leaned against a hitching post at the edge of the crowd, his weathered Stetson pulled low over steel blue eyes that missed nothing. He hadn't come to Yankton for the servant auction. His business was cattle driving a herd north from Texas to the railroad, but something about the young woman's quiet dignity amid such humiliation held his attention, when he should have been negotiating contracts with the railroad agent. "Next up," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, a healthy female servant aged 20, good with household duties, cooking and sewing. "As you can see, she's carrying, so you'll be getting 2 for the price of 1. Crude laughter rippled through the crowd of ranchers, merchants, and drifters. Garrett's jaw tightened as he watched Willow's eyes remain fixed on the distant horizon, refusing to acknowledge the jeers and appraising stares. "Bidding starts at $50, the auctioneer continued. "Who'll give me 50 for this fine specimen?" "50, called a voice from the crowd, a saloon owner known for working his female servants to exhaustion before selling them off again. "60, countered another man, a rancher with a reputation for cruelty. The bidding continued, and Garrett found himself pushing away from the post, moving closer to the platform. Something in the young woman's resigned posture spoke of a spirit not yet broken despite circumstances that would have crushed most. Her auburn hair, escaping from a simple braid, caught the afternoon sun, and for a moment their eyes met across the crowd. The flash of defiance he glimpsed behind the fear stirred something in him he thought long dead. $100, called the saloon owner. $120, the rancher countered. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with pleasure at the rising bids. "Do I hear 130, $200, Garrett heard himself say. Heads turned, surprised at the newcomer's voice and the substantial jump in price. The auctioneer beamed. $200 from the gentleman in the blue shirt. "Do I hear 220? The saloon owner squinted at Garrett, sizing him up before shaking his head. The rancher hesitated, then grudgingly raised his hand. $220. $300, Garrett said without hesitation. A murmur went through the crowd. Willow's eyes found him again, wariness and confusion replacing the defiance. $300 going once, the auctioneer called, looking eagerly at the rancher who spat into the dust and shook his head. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the blue shirt for $300. As Garrett approached the platform to complete the transaction, he felt the weight of the young woman's gaze upon him. He paid the auctioneer, who handed over a sheaf of papers declaring his ownership of one Willow Montgomery and her unborn child. The clerk removed Willow's shackles, and she rubbed her wrists, her eyes downcast as Garrett approached. "Come with me," he said quietly, not touching her, maintaining a respectful distance as they walked away from the auction platform. Instead of heading to the livery where his horse waited, Garrett led her to a quiet spot beside the general store. Willow stood silent, awaiting whatever orders her new master might give. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice low and gentle. Her head snapped up at the use of her surname, surprise evident in her emerald eyes. "I'm Garrett Ingram. I'm a cattle driver not looking for a servant." Her brow furrowed with confusion as he pulled out the ownership papers. With deliberate movements, he tore them in half, then quarters, then eighths, until they were nothing but confetti that scattered in the prairie wind. "What are you doing?" she whispered, the first words she'd spoken. "Giving you your freedom," he replied. "And if you're amenable, I'd like to offer you something else." He removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect that few men showed to servant girls. "Miss Montgomery, I've no right to ask, knowing nothing about you except what I've seen today, but I believe in my heart that no person should own another. Would you consider taking my hand in marriage instead?" Willow's eyes widened with disbelief. "You want to marry me? A pregnant servant girl you've just met? Why would you do such a thing?" "Because every person deserves dignity and choice," Garrett said. "I've got land north of here, a small ranch I'm building. It's not much yet, but it could be a home for you and your child. As my wife, you'd have protection under the law that you wouldn't have otherwise. And what would you expect in return for this? Generosity." Suspicion edged her voice, and Garrett couldn't blame her. "Companionship, perhaps. In time, maybe more if it's freely given. But I make this vow I'll never demand anything from you that you're not willing to give." He held her gaze steadily. "The choice is yours. You can take the money I would have paid for you and start somewhere new, or you can take a chance on a life with me." Willow studied him, searching for deceit in his expression. "Why would a man like you want a woman carrying another man's child?" "That child is innocent," Garrett said simply. "And you have courage that most men I know couldn't muster in your situation." A long moment passed between them, the sounds of the bustling town fading into the background. Finally, Willow spoke, her voice barely audible. "I accept your offer, Mr. Ingram, not because I have no choice, but because you've given me one when no one else would." Garrett nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips. "Then we'll be married before sundown if Reverend Taylor is available." As they walked side by side toward the small white church at the end of the dusty street, neither knew the journey that lay ahead, a journey that would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine. Forged in the crucible of the untamed West, where love was a luxury few could afford but the brave could find. The Reverend Taylor was indeed available, though visibly startled by the unusual couple seeking his services. The church was empty save for the Reverend's wife, who served as witness, and the town doctor, who happened to be visiting when they arrived. "Are you certain about this, young lady?" Reverend Taylor asked Willow privately while Garrett spoke with the doctor. "No one is forcing you. He's offering me freedom," Willow replied, her hands resting protectively over her belly. "That's more than I've had in years." The Reverend nodded, though concern still lined his face. "And the child, he says he'll raise it as his own." The simple ceremony took mere minutes. Garrett produced a plain gold band that had belonged to his mother, placing it carefully on Willow's finger as he spoke his vows. Willow had no ring to offer in return, so she placed her hand over his heart as she promised to be his wife. When it was done, Reverend Taylor pronounced them husband and wife. No kiss sealed their union, only a tentative clasp of hands as they turned to face their new life together. "I've got a room at the boarding house," Garrett said as they left the church. "We'll spend the night there, then head north tomorrow. It's a 3-day ride to my place." Willow's face paled. I haven't ridden in some time, and in my condition." "I've arranged for a wagon," he assured her. "Not the most comfortable ride, but better than horseback." That evening they shared a simple meal in the boarding house dining room, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. "Tell me about yourself," Garrett invited as they ate. "Where are you from?" Willow hesitated, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "St. Louis, originally. My father was a clockmaker. When he and my mother died of influenza 3 years ago, I was left with nothing. I took a position as a lady's maid, but—" Her voice trailed off. "The father of your child?" Garrett asked gently. She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Her son." When she discovered my condition, she sold my contract to a traveling merchant heading west. I've been passed from owner to owner since then." Garrett's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "No one will own you again. You have my word." Later, in the small room with its single bed, Garrett took extra blankets from the cupboard and made a pallet for himself on the floor. "Take the bed," he said. "You need proper rest." Willow stared at him. "But we're married now, don't you want?" "What I want," he interrupted gently, "is for you to know that your body is your own. Marriage gives me no right to claim it without your willing heart behind it." Tears filled her eyes for the first time since he'd met her. "I don't understand you, Garrett Ingram." "Get some sleep, Willow," he said softly. "We've got a long journey ahead." Morning came with a clear sky promising heat by midday. They left Yankton in a wagon loaded with supplies. Garrett had purchased flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, beans, and a few luxuries like canned peaches and hard candies. He'd also bought Willow a new dress, a warm shawl, and sturdy boots. As the town faded behind them, Willow watched her new husband guide the horses with confident hands. His profile against the rising sun was strong, his expression contemplative. What manner of man had she married? A foolish one, certainly, to burden himself with a pregnant woman he didn't know. Or perhaps a predator with motives yet unrevealed. Time would tell, and for now, the rocking motion of the wagon and the open prairie stretching before them lulled her into a cautious sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. The first day passed in relative silence, broken only by Garrett's occasional comments about landmarks or wildlife they passed. When they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek, he helped her down from the wagon with careful hands that released her the moment her feet touched the ground. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, noting the way she pressed a hand against her lower back. "Just stiff," she admitted. "The babe is active today." Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, or uncertainty. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her belly. Surprised by the request, Willow nodded. Garrett placed his large, calloused hand gently on the swell of her abdomen. As if on cue, the baby kicked vigorously against his palm. His face transformed with wonder, and for the first time, Willow saw him smile, truly smile, the expression softening the hard lines of his weathered face. "Strong," he murmured, removing his hand. "Like its mother." That night, they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods. Garrett built a small fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon. Willow watched, feeling useless. "Let me help," she said, rising awkwardly from where she'd been sitting. "I can cook." "Rest," he insisted. "You've been jostled in that wagon all day. Besides, I've been feeding myself for years. As your wife, it's my duty. As a person who's carrying a child, it's your duty to take care of yourself," he countered, his tone gentle but firm. "There'll be plenty of work to go around once we reach the ranch." After they'd eaten, Garrett spread bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Willow settled into hers, watching him through the dancing flames as he checked on the horses one last time before turning in. "Garrett," she called softly as he returned, "why did you really marry me?" He sat on his bedroll, contemplating the fire. "I told you, you told me what you thought a frightened woman needed to hear," she interrupted. "Now I'm asking for the truth." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost in the crackling of the fire. 3 years ago, I had a sister, Hannah. She fell in love with a man who turned out to be a monster. When she tried to leave him, he beat her so badly she lost the baby she was carrying and nearly died herself. I wasn't there to protect her." His jaw tightened. "By the time I found them, he'd sold her to a mining camp up in the Black Hills. I was too late." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, looked haunted. "When I saw you on that auction block, I saw Hannah. I couldn't fail again. Willow absorbed this, understanding dawning. "So I'm your redemption." "No," he said sharply. "You're not Hannah, and I know that. You're yourself a woman who deserves better than what life's handed you so far." He sighed. "Maybe I didn't think it through, maybe it was foolish. But I don't regret it." "Neither do I," Willow whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. The next 2 days of travel brought them closer to Garrett's ranch, the landscape gradually changing from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Willow began to feel the stirrings of hope, real hope, for the first time in years. Their conversations grew less stilted, more natural, as they shared pieces of their histories. Garrett told her of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war between the states, and his dream of building a cattle operation that would one day rival the great Texas spreads. Willow shared memories of her parents, her education, and her love of books and music. "There aren't many books at the ranch," Garrett admitted. "Just a Bible and a few dime novels, but next time I go to town I'll bring back whatever the mercantile has." "You don't need to, I want to," he said simply. "A home should have books. A home." The word resonated in Willow's heart, both longed for and feared. How many times had she dreamed of a home of her own, only to have that dream shattered? Late on the third day, they crested a hill, and Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below where a small cabin, barn, and corral nestled beside a winding creek. It was modest, far more modest than Willow had imagined. The cabin was rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. A vegetable garden, rather overgrown, stretched beside it. In the corral, several horses grazed, and beyond, she could see cattle scattered across the hillsides. "It's not much," Garrett said, watching her face carefully. "I've been building it slowly, doing most of the work myself when I'm not on cattle drives." "It's lovely," Willow said, and meant it. After years of uncertainty, even this humble homestead represented security she'd thought forever beyond her reach. As they approached, a dog came bounding from the cabin porch, a black and white border collie that barked joyfully at Garrett's return. "That's Scout," Garrett said, smiling as the dog circled the wagon. "And that," he nodded toward the cabin door where a man now stood, "is my friend Wolf Creek Charlie. He watches the place when I'm gone." Wolf Creek Charlie proved to be an elderly man with a long white beard and twinkling eyes. He regarded Willow with undisguised surprise as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. "Well now, Garrett, when you said you had news in your telegram, I wasn't expecting a wife," Charlie chuckled, extending a gnarled hand to Willow. "Welcome to the Rocking Eye, Mrs. Ingram." "Thank you, Mr. Charlie," Willow replied, taking his hand. "Just Charlie, miss. Everyone calls me Charlie." He turned to Garrett with a knowing look. "I aired out the cabin and stocked the pantry like you asked, even picked some flowers for the table. Didn't know why you wanted that, but now I see." Garrett looked slightly embarrassed. "I wanted her to feel welcome." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean. One large room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door led to a small bedroom, and a ladder indicated a loft space above. The furnishings were functional: a table with 4 chairs, a sofa covered in a quilt, a rocking chair near the fireplace. Someone, presumably Charlie, had indeed placed wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. "It's not what you're used to, I'm sure," Garrett said, watching Willow take in her new home. "It's perfect," she replied, and was surprised to find she wasn't just being polite. After the uncertainty of the past months, the solid walls and roof represented safety she hadn't dared hope for. Charlie stayed for supper, entertaining them with tales of local characters and the early days of the Dakota Territory. When he finally took his leave to return to his own small cabin a mile downstream, A comfortable silence fell between the newlyweds. "You'll take the bedroom," Garrett said, bringing in his bedroll. "I'll sleep out here." Willow looked at the sofa, which was clearly too short for his tall frame. "That doesn't seem fair. It's your home, your bed." "It's our home now," he corrected gently. "And you need proper rest in your condition." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with the sounds of the prairie night coming through the open window, Willow wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been property, expecting to be sold to the highest bidder with no say in her fate. Now she was a married woman with a home, however humble, and a husband who treated her with a respect she'd almost forgotten she deserved. The baby kicked, as if reminding her that the future held more changes still. What would Garrett do when the child arrived? He claimed he would treat it as his own, but words came easy. Actions, as she well knew, might tell a different story. In the main room, Garrett shifted on the too small sofa, his thoughts not dissimilar to his wife's. He had acted on impulse, guided by memories and regrets that haunted him still. Now he had a pregnant wife he barely knew, a responsibility he hadn't planned for. Yet when he thought of Willow's quiet strength, the dignity she maintained despite her circumstances, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't expected: admiration that went beyond compassion, interest that transcended duty. Morning brought new routines as they navigated their unexpected partnership. Garrett showed Willow around the ranch, introducing her to the small herd of cattle, the chickens that provided eggs, and the vegetable garden that needed attention. "I'm not much of a gardener," he admitted. "Been too busy with the cattle and building the place up." "I can help with that," Willow offered. "My mother kept a garden. I know a bit about growing things." The look of relief on his face made her smile. "That would be a blessing. I can handle most things, but plants seem to die under my care." Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern of shared work and cautious coexistence. Willow took over the cooking and tending the garden, while Garrett handled the livestock and continued work on expanding the barn. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset and talking gradually, hesitantly sharing more of themselves. Willow learned that Garrett had fought for the Union during the war, despite being from Pennsylvania, where many had Southern sympathies. He'd seen enough violence to last several lifetimes, and had come west, seeking peace as much as opportunity. He discovered that Willow had a beautiful singing voice, though she rarely used it now, and that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before circumstances derailed her plans. "You could still teach," he suggested one evening as they shelled peas together at the kitchen table. "There's no school near here yet, but there are families scattered about. They might welcome someone to teach their children." Willow looked up, surprised. "You wouldn't mind?" "Mind? Why would I mind you using your gifts?" Some men prefer their wives to focus solely on home and family. Garrett's expression grew thoughtful. "A home needs tending, that's certain, but a person needs purpose beyond daily tasks. I wouldn't want to deny you yours." His consideration touched her deeply. More and more, she found herself watching him: the gentle way he handled newborn calves, his patience with a skittish colt, the care he took to make sure she wasn't overtaxing herself as her pregnancy advanced. One evening in late August, a violent thunderstorm swept across the prairie. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the cabin walls. Willow, who had always feared storms, sat rigid on the sofa as rain lashed against the windows. When a particularly loud thunderclap rattled the dishes, she couldn't suppress a small cry of alarm. Garrett, who had been mending a bridle by the fire, looked up. "You all right?" "I've never liked storms," she admitted, embarrassed. "Silly, I know." "Not silly at all," he said, setting aside his work. "My mother was the same way." He hesitated, then moved to sit beside her on the sofa. Would it help if I read aloud? Might take your mind off the storm." Without waiting for an answer, he retrieved the Bible from the shelf and opened it to the book of Psalms. His deep voice filled the cabin, somehow both complimenting and subduing the storm's fury. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." As he read, Willow gradually relaxed, finding comfort not just in the familiar words but in Garrett's steady presence beside her. When he reached the end of the psalm, she found herself leaning slightly against him, drawn to his warmth and stability. "Better?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition of growing feelings neither had expected. For a moment, Willow thought he might kiss her, and realized with a start that she wanted him to. But then the baby kicked hard enough for Garrett to feel it where their sides touched, and the moment passed. "You should get some rest," he said, rising from the sofa. "Storm's moving on now." As September arrived, bringing cooler days and the first hints of autumn color to the aspens, Willow's time grew near. Garrett rode to the nearest town, returning with Mrs. Elsie Cooper, a midwife with 30 years' experience bringing babies into the world. "You've done well caring for yourself," Mrs. Cooper told Willow after examining her. "The baby is positioned properly, and you're strong and healthy. I don't anticipate any problems." Garrett seemed to breathe easier at this news. He'd grown increasingly concerned as Willow's due date approached, aware of how far they were from proper medical care if complications arose. "I'll stay until the little one arrives," Mrs. Cooper announced, settling into the spare bedroom that Garrett had been building as a nursery but had hastily converted for the midwife's use. He returned to sleeping on the sofa, now with Scout for company. 2 days later, just as dawn broke over the eastern hills, Willow's labor began. Mrs. Cooper shooed Garrett from the cabin with instructions to keep himself busy and not to worry. "First babies often take their time," she assured him. "I'll call if we need you." Garrett spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, splitting more firewood than they could use in a month, fixing fence posts that didn't need fixing, and checking on the cattle 3 times more than necessary. As evening approached with no news, he paced the porch, unable to concentrate on any task. "Mr. Ingram," Mrs. Cooper called from the doorway just as the first stars appeared. "Come meet your daughter." Heart hammering, Garrett entered the cabin. In the bedroom, Willow lay propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Garrett," she whispered as he approached, "she's perfect." He stood beside the bed, suddenly uncertain. Willow shifted the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a dusting of dark hair. "Would you like to hold her?" Carefully, as if handling the most fragile glass, Garrett took the newborn in his arms. The baby's eyes opened dark blue, unfocused, and something inside him changed forever. This child might not share his blood, but in that moment she became undeniably his. "She needs a name," Willow said softly, watching the emotion play across his face. "What would you like to call her?" Willow hesitated. "I was thinking, perhaps Hannah, after your sister." Garrett's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Hannah," he repeated, looking down at the infant who had curled her tiny hand around his finger. "Hannah Ingram, it's perfect." That night, with Mrs. Cooper asleep in the spare room and baby Hannah sleeping in a cradle, Garrett had crafted, husband and wife shared the bedroom for the first time. Garrett made a pallet on the floor beside the bed, unwilling to be far from either of them. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," Willow said, her voice drowsy with exhaustion but certain. "There's room here beside me." Garrett hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she replied. "I'd like you near." He slipped into the bed beside her, careful not to jostle her sore body. For a long moment they lay in silence, listening to the baby's soft breathing. "Thank you," Willow whispered finally, "for giving her a home, for giving us both a home." Garrett found her hand in the darkness, lacing his fingers with hers. "Thank you for trusting me enough to build one together." The days following Hannah's birth brought new challenges and joys. Mrs. Cooper stayed another week, teaching Willow the art of nursing and caring for a newborn, before taking her leave with promises to return for a visit in the spring. Garrett watched in wonder as Willow transformed into a mother, her natural grace extending to this new role as if she'd been born to it. He found himself lingering over simple moments, Willow singing softly to Hannah as she rocked her to sleep, the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his own, the three of them together on the porch watching the sunset. As October painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Garrett knew he needed to make a decision. Winter would soon arrive, and there were preparations to be made. "I've been offered a chance to drive a herd south before the heavy snows," he told Willow one evening as they sat by the fire, Hannah asleep in her cradle. "The pay would be good enough to see us through the winter comfortably and buy more breeding stock in the spring." Willow looked up from her mending. "How long would you be gone? 4 weeks, maybe 5, depending on the weather." She nodded slowly, considering. "We'll be all right here. I know how to handle things." "That's not what concerns me," Garrett admitted. "The thought of leaving you and Hannah alone. It doesn't sit right. We won't be alone. Wolf Creek Charlie is just downstream, and you said the Petersons are only an hour's ride away if we need help." She set her sewing aside. "This is your livelihood, Garrett. We'll manage until you return." He studied her face in the firelight. "When I first saw you on that auction platform, I thought you needed saving. I'm beginning to think I was wrong about who was saving whom." A slow smile spread across Willow's face. "Perhaps we're saving each other." The night before his departure, after Hannah had been fed and settled for her first sleep of the night, Garrett and Willow sat together on the porch. The air was crisp with the promise of frost, the sky a vast canopy of stars. "I've been thinking," Willow said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about us. This arrangement we have." Garrett tensed slightly beside her. "What about it? When you married me, you said you wouldn't demand anything I wasn't willing to give." She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the faint light spilling from the cabin windows. "What if I am willing? What if I want more than an arrangement, more than gratitude and convenience between us?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "Willow, are you saying—" "I'm saying that somewhere between Yankton and here, between you tearing up those papers and holding my daughter as if she were your own blood, I've fallen in love with you, Garrett Ingram." The words rushed out as if she feared losing courage. "I don't expect you to feel the same. I know this began as an act of compassion on your part," but her words were cut off as Garrett gently cradled her face in his hands. "I think I began falling for you the moment you stood on that platform with your head held high despite everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been afraid to tell you, afraid you might feel obligated because of what I did." "There's no obligation in my heart," Willow whispered. "Only love." When their lips finally met, it was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as they gave themselves permission to acknowledge what had been growing between them. Garrett's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Willow's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willow Ingram, more than I thought possible." That night, for the first time, they truly became husband and wife, their union no longer one of convenience but of genuine love and desire. Their coming together was tender, unhurried, a discovery of each other that left them both transformed. In the morning, Willow stood on the porch with Hannah in her arms, watching as Garrett mounted his horse. The goodbye was difficult for them both, but softened by the promises they'd made in the night. "I'll be back before the first heavy snow," he vowed, leaning down from the saddle for one last kiss. "Take care of our daughter." "Our daughter," Willow repeated, smiling through tears. "Hurry home to us." As she watched him ride away, Hannah stirring against her chest, Willow felt not fear of abandonment but certainty of return. Their story, which had begun with an auction and torn papers, was still being written not by circumstances or the cruelty of others, but by their own choices and the love they'd found against all odds. The weeks of Garrett's absence passed more quickly than Willow had anticipated, filled as they were with caring for Hannah and preparing the ranch for winter. She harvested the last of the garden vegetables, preserved what she could, and split kindling for the fireplace. Wolf Creek Charlie checked on them every few days, bringing fish from the creek and news from travelers passing through. "Your man sent word," Charlie told her one crisp November morning. "The cattle drive's going well. They're making good time and should be back before Thanksgiving, weather permitting." Willow's heart lifted at this news. She'd been counting the days, watching the horizon, hoping for Garrett's return before the harsh Dakota winter set in. Hannah, now almost 2 months old, was growing stronger daily, her eyes gradually changing from newborn blue to a hazel that reminded Willow of spring leaves. "Your papa will be home soon," she would tell the baby during their quiet moments together. "He'll be so surprised by how you've grown." True to his word, Garrett returned 3 days before Thanksgiving, riding into the yard just as Willow was gathering eggs from the henhouse. She heard Scout's excited barking first, then the sound of hoofbeats. Clutching the basket of eggs, she ran around the cabin to see Garrett dismounting, his face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of her. Willow didn't remember setting down the eggs, only the feeling of his arms enfolding her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of weeks of longing. "I've missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Every mile, every day." "We've missed you too," she said, drawing back just enough to see his face more tanned than when he'd left, a new scar along his jawline, but his eyes as warm and steady as she remembered. Inside the cabin, Hannah was just waking from her nap. Garrett approached the cradle almost reverently, his expression softening as he gazed down at his daughter. "She's grown so much," he said, wonder in his voice as he lifted her carefully. Hannah studied him with solemn eyes before breaking into a toothless smile that made Garrett laugh with delight. "She remembers me. I've told her about you every day," Willow said, watching the reunion with her heart full. "Shown her your picture." The cattle drive had been successful, bringing a sum that would indeed see them comfortably through the winter and allow for expansion of their herd in the spring. But more precious than the money he'd earned was the certainty Garrett had gained during his weeks-away certainty that what he had with Willow and Hannah was what he wanted for the rest of his life. That winter proved to be one of the harshest in memory. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Yet inside, warmth prevailed not just from the constantly burning fire, but from the love that had taken root and flourished between them. They established new routines and traditions. Garrett read aloud in the evenings from the Bible, from dime novels, and eventually from the books he'd purchased during the cattle drive, knowing Willow's love of literature. She taught him songs from her childhood, and they sang together while Hannah watched from her cradle, entranced by their voices. When Christmas arrived, they exchanged simple gifts: a new shawl Garrett had bought for Willow, a carved wooden horse she had commissioned from Charlie for him. But their greatest gift came from Hannah, who chose that day to roll over for the first time, prompting celebrations as joyous as any grand holiday feast. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, and the first signs of spring appeared, Willow and Garrett began making plans for the future. The money from the cattle drive would allow them to expand their operation, and Garrett had ideas for improving the cabin. "I'm thinking we should add another bedroom," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Hannah will need her own space eventually." Willow looked up from her knitting. "That would be wise," she agreed. "Perhaps sooner than later." Something in her tone made Garrett pause. "What are you saying, Willow?" A smile touched her lips as she set aside her work and took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "I'm saying that by harvest time, Hannah will have a brother or sister." Joy flooded Garrett's face as the meaning of her words registered. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. Mrs. Cooper confirmed it when she visited last week." Garrett gathered Willow into his arms, his laughter mingling with happy tears. This child would be theirs in every sense, born of the love they'd built together, a testament to the family they'd created from the most unlikely beginning. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Never thought I deserved it." "We both deserve happiness," Willow said softly, cradling his face in her hands. "After everything, we've earned this joy." As spring blossomed into summer, the ranch flourished alongside Willow's growing belly. Garrett added not just one room but two to the cabin, along with a proper front porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Their herd increased, as did their flock of chickens, and Willow's garden yielded abundantly. Hannah took her first steps in July, toddling unsteadily from Willow to Garrett with determination that made them both laugh. She was speaking now two simple words like Mama, Papa, and Scout that filled their days with wonder. In August, just as the first harvests were coming in, Willow gave birth to a son they named Daniel after her father. Unlike Hannah's birth, which had been overshadowed by uncertainty, Daniel arrived in a home filled with love and anticipation, with a father pacing anxiously outside and a sister who peered curiously at her new brother with Garrett's eyes and Willow's smile. "He's perfect," Garrett whispered when Mrs. Cooper placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "Thank you, Willow, for everything." As summer waned into autumn, bringing with it the rich colors and cooling temperatures that signaled another turning of the seasons, Willow often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this life. From the desperation of that auction platform in Yankton to the fullness of her days now nursing Daniel, watching Hannah explore the world around her, working alongside Garrett to build something lasting, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hannah playing with Scout in the yard and Daniel sleeping in Willow's arms, she shared these thoughts with Garrett. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day you bid on me?" Garrett nodded, his eyes on the horizon where gold was fading to deep purple. "I think about what might have happened if I'd ridden out of town an hour earlier, or if I'd gone a different direction. How easily we might have missed each other. But we didn't," Willow said softly. "You were there, and you made a choice that changed everything." "The best choice I ever made," he replied, reaching for her hand. "Tearing up those papers and asking for your hand instead, I had no idea what I was starting." Willow leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she once couldn't have imagined. "I was so afraid that day, so certain no good could come from whatever man bought me. When you tore those papers, I thought you were mad." Garrett chuckled. "Maybe I was a little. But something told me you were worth far more than any price they could put on you. And now look at us," she marveled, gazing at their daughter chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. "A family, a home, a future." "A love story," Garrett added, pressing a kiss to her temple. one I'm grateful to be living every day. As the years passed, the Ingram Ranch grew and prospered. Garrett's cattle operation expanded, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Willow, true to her early dreams, eventually started a small school that served the children of neighboring ranches as well as her own growing family. Hannah grew into a confident young woman with her mother's strength and her father's quiet determination. Though she knew the circumstances of her birth, she never doubted her place in the family or her father's love. Daniel was joined by 3 more siblings, twin girls, Emma and Sarah, born 2 years after him, and another boy, James, who arrived when Hannah was 8. The story of how their parents met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It was a reminder, Garrett would say, that love could take root in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the bravest act was to tear up what bound you to the past and reach instead for an uncertain future. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children grown or growing and the ranch more prosperous than they'd ever imagined, Garrett surprised Willow with a gift, a small, weathered piece of paper he'd kept all these years. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding it carefully. "A fragment," he explained, "of the ownership papers I tore up that day in Yankton. I kept one piece, tucked in my Bible as a reminder." Tears filled Willow's eyes as she looked at the faded ink, the torn edges. A reminder of what? "That sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold," he said, taking her hand, the same hand that had worn his mother's ring for 2 decades now. "That true worth isn't measured in dollars or contracts, but in courage and heart." Willow looked around their home at the photographs of their children on the walls, the books lining the shelves, the evidence of a life richly lived, and then back at the man who had seen her value when she'd been at her lowest. "I love you, Garrett Ingram," she said, the words as true now as they had been that first night on the porch when she'd found the courage to speak them. "And I love you, Willow Ingram," he replied, drawing her close. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left together." As the sun set over the Dakota prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, not just the physical structure, but the life they'd created from a moment of compassion, an act of defiance against a world that would reduce a person to property, and a love that had grown strong and enduring in the fertile soil of respect and trust. Their story, which had begun with a desperate auction and torn papers, continued to unfold, a testament to the power of choice, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of love freely given and gratefully received.